사그마이스터 대표님 강연 잘 들었습니다. 여러분 들으셨죠? 사이클 짧은 X보다는 좀 긴 호흡의 월간디자인 같은 잡지를 보시면 좋지 않을까 싶습니다. 네, 농담이었고요. 네, 저는 이제 강연을 들으면서 인생은 가까이서 보면 비극이고 멀리서 보면 희극이라고 이야기했었던 찰리 채플린 이야기가 생각이 나더라고요. 저희의 관점을 바꿔주는 귀한 강연이었던 것 같습니다. 먼저 제가 질문을 몇 가지 드리고 그 다음에 마이크를 청중분들께 넘기고자 합니다. 제가 드리고 싶은 첫 번째 질문은 이건데요. 사실 데이터를 기반으로 긍정적인 시각을 갖게 해주신다는 대표님의 어떤 이야기들은 굉장히 감명 깊게 다가왔지만은 뭐 또 한편으로는 우리가 너무나 많은 네거티브한 뉴스를 보고 있고 그 중에 하나가 제 생각에는 특히 올해 여러분들 모두 다 느끼셨을 것 같은데 그 기후 위기에 대한 굉장히 큰 경고와 위험성들을 느꼈을 거라고 생각을 합니다. 그런 의미에서 방금 아까 전에 발표 중에도 허드슨강의 수질이 개선되었었던 이야기를 해주셨는데 혹시 이 기후 위기와 관련된 지구 온난화와 관련된 것 중에서도 우리가 아주 조금이라도 희망을 발견할 수 있는 데이터를 발견하신 것이 있는지 좀 궁금합니다.
Well, I mean, you're totally right. There are a number of problems right now that we didn't have 100 years ago or 200 years ago. I mean, the climate crisis, of course, started specifically in Europe 200 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, when Europe already then, as the only continent, put CO2 up into the air. But it didn't really come to a real problem, the real problem we have now. And I think another one that we should mention is, the deaths of species. These really are new and contemporary problems that weren't around 200 years ago. I also think that even though they were not around, I think still some of the experiences from the past are relevant. So let's say in my case, I am now 61 years old, and I found with age that humanity is much more flexible than I had given it credit for when I was 20 years old. So I would say that, when I was 20, there was a lot of talk about the population explosion. And there were very good scientists who specifically at Columbia in New York and also at Stanford in California, who believed that we will have millions and millions of people dying by the year 2000 because we won't be able to feed them. And it turned out we mastered that without any problems, to the point where many countries, including Korea, actually have the exact opposite problem. That we are now having way too few children, and that is that we have not a population explosion, but a population implosion. Now, I'm not saying that obviously, the same tactics won't help us for global warming. But I do believe that already the initiations that we made in savings, almost every country, including Korea, is now producing way less CO2 per person than we did 10 years ago. I also believe that considering the unbelievable incentives that are out there, both financially but also fame-wise, for anybody to solve, to make big headways technology-wise in as far as the climate is concerned, from those perspectives, I am pretty confident that with a lot of work, not by sitting around, but with a lot of work, we will be able to also tackle that problem.
네, 사실 제가 어제 인스타그램에도 그 이야기를 남겼거든요. 좀 11년 전에 뵀을 때보다 조금 뭔가 부드러워진 것 같다는 느낌을 받았다 이렇게 인스타그램에다가 올렸는데 그게 사실이었네요. 두 번째 질문은 혹시 여러분 전시 다 한번 둘러보고 오셨나요? 네. 이번에 특별히 한국 전시를 기획하면서 이제 그 한국 서울에 관련된 작품도 선보이신 걸로 알고 있는데 그리고 굉장히 오래전부터 서울을 여러 번 방문을 하셨으니까 어떤 그 데이터를 정리를 하면서 이번 에디션을 준비를 하면서 특별히 굉장히 흥미롭게 봤었던 어떤 데이터, 서울과 관련된 한국과 관련된 데이터가 있다면 무엇인지 알려주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
Well, absolutely, of course. I think that the one, of course, that was most impressive to me was really longevity. I like that measurement anyway for any country because it shows so much. It shows how great is their health system. It ultimately also includes how well is their economy doing, because there is a direct correlation between how well the economy is doing and the average life expectancy. But of course, I was super impressed by Korea on one hand because how unbelievably low it was as little as 120 years ago, and that you were able to basically jump over all these other countries, over all these European countries, including the most developed Northern European, Scandinavian countries, including higher than, normally in most measurements, Finland, Sweden, they're always on the top. But Korea is actually better than them, and I think that's an incredible achievement. So I think that was at the very heart. That was really for one thing, because it's so basic, but on the other hand, that you can read many other things into it. That was at the heart of it, and that's why it was clear we're going to make that into the big installation. And then for the special prints, for the edition prints, it was also quite clear that let's choose some basic things like, food sufficiency or rice yield, some very basic things, and then go into some very specific things like visitors, like amount of art museums, how that increased, or extremely specific things, visitorships to DDP, very, very much very specific on this. And I'm aware of it that this is an outsider's point of view. I am not Korean. I look at this very much from the outside. And I'm also very aware that not everything is great in Korea. I'm sure that there is many things that to tackle, to improve in Korea. I have no doubt about it. From an outsider's point of view, the development definitely looks to go into the right direction.
네, 감사합니다. 확실히 저도 매체에 있으면서 문화예술을 향유하고 얼마나 관심이 높아지고 있는지를 항상 느끼게 되거든요. 그런 면에서 대표님께서 들여다본 데이터가 분명히 의미 있다고 생각을 하고, 말씀하신 것처럼 기대 수명이 굉장히 늘어난 것도 사실이니까요. 한 80년 뒤에 여러분들 이곳에 다 같이 모여서 다시 한번 DDP 포럼을 들어봐도 좋지 않을까라는 생각을 해봅니다. 네, 저는 여기까지 질문을 드리고 아마 또 많은 궁금증이 있을 것 같아요. 질문 있으신 분 손 들어주시면은 여기 바로 앞에 계십니다.
안녕하세요. 저는 현재 대학교 2학년으로서 디자인을 공부하고 있는 학생인데, 저의 장래희망은 사그마이스터 씨와 똑같이 앨범 패키지를 디자인하는 것이 제 목표입니다. 여러 가지 음악들을 어릴 때부터 들으면서 자랐고, 그렇기 때문에 디자인을 공부하면서 제 진로를 어디로 정해야 할지 늘 고민을 하다가, 아까 보여주신 앨범들은 제가 아는 아티스트들임에도 불구하고 제가 전혀 본 적이 없는 앨범 디자인이었습니다. 그런 앨범을 디자인함에 있어서 어떤 아티스트들의 특별한 행보나 행동에서 영향을 받은 것인지, 아니면은 그저 창작가 본인의 아이디어만 가지고 그런 디자인이 나온 것인지 궁금합니다.
No, I think we always took the job of designing albums as a job of visualizing the emotion of the music. So it's very, very tightly connected to the music. Our normal process would be we would meet with the band. I would talk extensively to the people who wrote the music, if it was specific people in the band. We would be in the studio. They would normally call us in when they were busy recording. And I would talk to them about where the title comes from, where the music comes from, why they're making a new album, all of those things. But I would try not to talk about the album cover, because I always felt that this was our job to do, not the band's job. And but I would caution you to make that the center of your design practice, because I think right now it's extremely difficult to make a living designing album covers, simply because their importance has faded. You know, you still have high quality vinyl covers, but that's very much for a specialty audience. I buy vinyl covers, and I buy them only by the worth of the cover, and I discover very good music from it. But you know, even very large bands, let's say bands that when we did them 15, 20 years ago, would have a first print run of 5 million, now might publish 10 or 20,000 vinyl covers, and the rest is a tiny image on Spotify or whatever streaming service you listen to that has really very limited importance, which I think is a pity for designers, but it's a real pity for musicians, because so many of us now listen to music according to playlists, but we don't, not only don't we know how the band looks like, we in many cases don't even know the name of the band. And so even if that band plays in our city and there is a poster, we wouldn't even know that it's the band that we listen to at the office and that we like that song specifically. So I think it's a real problem for musicians. And you can see that some, not all, but some of the biggest tours, I'm not sure if that's true for Korea, but definitely in the United States and in Europe, if you look at the Billboard biggest tours this year, it's the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, all people that have become famous when the album cover was still around. And there are exceptions, Taylor Swift and some others that can cut in there, but by and large, it's much, much, much more difficult, even for very famous bands, to really make a name for themselves. And that becomes extremely difficult if you're not at that level of fame. So I think, like from my perspective, the album cover, well, existed since the 1920s, but really became I would say, a medium for design expression, maybe in the mid-70s, and had its heyday maybe until the year 2000, and then kind of tickled off. There is fantastic album covers being made now, but as I said, it's for a tiny audience. What else? Oh, the first row is really active here.
저는 15년 전부터 학생들 가르치면서 사그마이스터를 우리나라 학생들한테 항상 보여주면서 제 자신이 아주 빅팬이었고요. 그래서 지금 제가 서울에 살고 있다는 게 너무 자랑스럽습니다. 그리고 두 가지 질문이 있는데요. 이번에 저도 그래픽 디자이너고 이제 앞으로 패션 브랜드를 준비하고 있는데요. 그래서 이번에 미디움으로 패션 아이템을 사용하신 그 이유가 있는지 한 가지요. 그리고 두 번째로는 AI가 지금 너무 이미 와버렸고 그런 것들이 스테판 사그마이스터님과 작품과 함께 어우러진다면 이제 앞으로 엄청난 것들이 나올 것 같은 그런 생각이 드는데 혹시 어떻게 그 부분에 대해서 플래닝하고 계신 게 있는지 여쭤봅니다.
Okay, so both great questions. First, the fashion one. I basically I want to get this message of long-term thinking and that the results are much more positive than from the short term. I want to get that out in every means possible. And I originally come from a family of clothing store. Like my dad and my mom had a clothing store all their life, and they sold clothing. That's in the building that I grew up in. My two older brothers took that over, and they now have many clothing stores, maybe 20 or so. So I was always close to that world, but never wanted to participate. And then now when I can do whatever I want, I thought it would be a nice idea to try that out. I also had an ex-girlfriend who is a fashion designer who knew a lot about clothing production, and she agreed to help me with producing this stuff. I could not have done it by myself. There's too much specialty knowledge, arm length, oh my God, like, you know, how to deal with particular sewers and manufacturers that I couldn't have dealt with. So that also was the opportunity for it. It's whenever I go into another field, like fashion in this case, or also with the film, into the film world, one of the things that I discover is how unbelievably difficult these worlds are. And I have a new appreciation for filmmakers and for fashion designers, or for people who create their own label, because it's difficult. Like, it's really like to create this whole thing, not just from designing the clothes and producing them, but also distributing them, selling them, creating the website that does that, figuring out, in our case, how to do a pop-up shop in Mexico City, and how to import 20 pieces of coats, in all stuff that I don't have real interest in, but that you can kind of have to become knowledgeable about if you want to do this. So that's one. And number two was AI, for sure. How can we have a talk without AI? Yes, actually, we are working on promoting the book that just came out 10 days ago or so. And the initial idea was actually to create these little interviews where a manatee is like a walrus kind of animal, would interview me about the book. And the idea initially was to do this in AI. And it turned out that AI isn't quite good enough for it. So whenever we tried it in AI, and at the same time also tried to make the walrus traditionally out of computer graphics, like build it in 3D, build a skeleton inside, and then animate the skeleton like a puppet, so that we can make the whole walrus-like creature ask me questions. And we tried both at the same time, and it turned out that for now we were more successful doing it in 3D. But I have to admit that the still images that came out of AI influenced the design of the walrus that we did in 3D. So it was already helpful. And I think that's for now my feeling. Like, I still am not very partial about most of the looks that come out of AI. I've seen some very smart designers being quite able to circumvent that standard mid-journey look, you know, that whatever, sci-fi, hyper-realistic thing that I couldn't stand before AI, and I don't like it now. And I feel bad for all those illustrators who trained themselves to become very, very good at that look, and that now can be replicated by basically everybody pretty simply. But I do believe if we are going to get there, that it's going to become more controllable. And then we'll see. It's, of course, it seems to me that AI, because it's based on existing files from the internet, will always only be able to come up with existing ideas. But I'm not 100% sure about it, because it could also be that just the incredible possibility of remixing those ideas already delivers enough newness for it to be great. But it could also be, or let's say, you know, I run an Instagram account where young designers often send in things and I comment them on. And recently, a young designer said that he had created a sci-fi story about the future, about the climate crisis, how everybody had to move up north. And he created a trailer for this story using AI. And the trailer looked extremely professional, meaning it would have been absolutely impossible for a young designer to do a year ago, impossible, because it had very high production values. It had planes exploding, like would have been impossible. And at the same time, it looked like any other dystopian science fiction film you've ever seen. So it was kind of uninteresting. But I'm not sure. And very unusually for a technology development, nor are the people who know much more than I am. Like, I follow people who think that this is all going to be absolutely fantastic, who I found trustworthy in the past, and I follow people that think this is going to be real danger and really awful that I found trustworthy. So I think there right now, because of the incredible sophistication and newness, it's difficult to say where it's ultimately going. I myself do believe, because of my looking into history over the past 5 years, that, and because I know that when we invented the hammer, yes, there were some people who killed their neighbor with the hammer, but most of us built a house with it. And I believe it will be similar with AI.
네, 저는 서울에서 학부 학생들과 대학원 학생의 교육을 담당하고 있는 교육자의 길을 가고 있는데요. 스테판 세그마이스터도 커머셜 디자이너로서 그리고 아티스트로서의 길을 가고 있지만 이력 중에 하나를 보면 SV에서 교육자로서 활동하고 있다는 것도 굉장히 눈에 띄는 부분입니다. 그래서 데이터 드리븐 인스피레이션이나 그 영감이라든가 미디어의 어떤 지속성에 있어서의 한계라든가 이런 것들에 대한 이슈를 많이 제기해 주셨는데 스테판 사그마이스터가 진행하는 교육자로서의 어떤 대학원 수업에서는 어떤 미션을 통해서 어떠한 깨달음을 학생들한테 좀 주고자 할까가 사뭇 궁금해졌습니다. 그런 것에 대한 이야기를 나눠주실 수 있으실지요?
Sure. So I teach a class that's called How to Touch Somebody's Heart with Design. And the class, the students have to do 3 projects every class, where they not only just prove to me with their project that they touched somebody, but they have to touch the people that they set out to touch. So right now we are working on the 2nd project, which is, I think, it's the most difficult of the 3, where they have to touch a group of people. And they can choose that group of people. So it has to, normally it has to be between 10 and 100 people that they have to touch. And they, the project that they have to bring into class is a little documentation of what they did, show that they delivered it, that what they did to that group of people, and show if those people were actually touched or not. And I can give you an example of a successful project. Was done by a student who, to earn money himself, worked at late-night fast food chains. So he worked for McDonald's and Burger King in the late night, and saw how difficult it was. And he saw, because you have a lot of drunk people coming in, it's not a fun job, and it's not a job that you get thanked for. And so he thought it would be a nice project to thank late-night fast food workers. And so what he did was he recruited a couple of other students, and he created the Golden Hamburger Award, which was a sculpture of a hamburger all spray painted gold, and he put it on a velvet cushion, and they would go into a McDonald's at 3 in the morning, open the door, and roll out a red carpet. And then two of the students would come in with ghetto blasters, and they would blast sort of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da kind of music. And he would go up there and present the crew who was working there the Golden Hamburger Award. Thank you for delivering food to us when we're drunk. That sort of thing. And he had another student videotape it, and the whole thing was amazing because you saw like big black guys wiping their tears, in the background. So very, very clearly it became obvious that the people were touched. And the reason I'm teaching that class, there's a couple of reasons, but the main one is that they see what results the things that they do have, that the stuff that they do has to work, that functionality, that a goal needs to be met. And for the students who don't meet it, this is fine with me, but they have to put it into their final little documentation why it didn't work, what they thought was the reason it didn't work. And I think then, also just quite important that there is not just a functioning part about design, but there needs to be a delightful part of design. Like that design that just function is engineering, and in most cases is bad design. Like design, I think by definition, needs to have something joyous in there for it to be good design. So I've been teaching that class for many, many years, and it's been little up and down, but mostly also satisfying for me.
개인적으로는 너무나 존경하고 지금까지 디자인 공부를 계속 하게 해준 그러한 스테판이라서 정말 5년 전에 AGI에서 뵙고 이렇게 또 뵙게 돼서 너무나 영광입니다. 개인적으로 사실은 스테판이 디자이너로서 개인적인 어떤 그런 이야기들은 제가 많이 접하지 못했는데 혹시 그 영감이나 디자인을 지속적으로 이렇게 아이디어를 유지할 수 있었던 디자인의 라이프 루틴이나 아니면 관리 뭐 그런 팁을 좀 공유해 주실 수 있으면 감사하겠습니다.
Sure, absolutely. So if you haven't seen me sharing a lot of personal stories, I would recommend watching the Happy film. It's very personal, and I definitely probably share more personal stories in that film than, I don't know, any other designer that I know of. But as far as staying fresh or staying inspired, I think the best thing that I've ever done was the sabbaticals. I think some of you might know, every 7 years, I take 1 year break, and I normally very much work in that year. It's not like that I sit on the beach. I would be allowed to sit on the beach, But it just happens that I much prefer working on something, but it's a break from what I normally do. And now I don't recommend this to students. I think that you should be students, and once you're done with your studies, you should not take a sabbatical. But what worked for me was, after 7 years of running the studio, to be pulled out from my daily routine and be in this completely different routine was unbelievably helpful. And if I look back now at, I've been a designer, depending on how I count, but roughly for 40 years, maybe even I could count even a little bit more, because I did the first printed things when I was 15. And if I look back at those years and see what were my favorite pieces, or what were the things that I really think now were worthwhile to do, many of those came out of the sabbaticals, many. And they wouldn't exist if I wouldn't have done the sabbaticals. So I definitely recommend that. It's scary, specifically the first one, and it was very scary for me. I thought I'm going to be forgotten. I thought it will look very unprofessional. And I had some other fears too, but those were the main fears, and neither one of them became true. And in the meantime, I at one time did a talk about my sabbaticals at a very famous conference, and many people saw that talk online, millions of people actually. So now I have sometimes people coming up to me and say, I saw your talk and I also did a sabbatical. And then of course I ask them, how was it? And I always get a totally 100% enthusiastic answer. So it really seems to work for a lot of people. And I ask them, in what profession are you? And it comes from everywhere. It's people who work for large companies, for small companies, people with families, single people, rich people, not so rich people. I don't think it would work, obviously. If you're extremely poor, you cannot take a sabbatical. But I would think that from a possibility point of view, if you're not a student, most people in this room could take a sabbatical, but I understand it's scary. And it needs a lot of planning, and it needs a lot of overcoming of fear. But I would say, and I didn't before I talked to all those people, but I would say, for those of you who are in a profession that requires ideas, and for those of you who have already worked, I would say a minimum of 5 or 7 or 10 years, and this is something that is appealing to you, then I can absolutely 100% recommend it. And it was definitely, to finally answer your question straight, it was definitely, without a doubt, the single best and most efficient strategy that made me keep my love and enthusiasm for design. Because it's so easy. Look, most of my students are designers by passion. But when I talk to them 3 years after they left the university and they're in the job, many of them see it just as a job. And their passion is maybe in the middle. And I found the sabbaticals to be incredibly helpful on the way to keep my job as a calling.
네. 안식년 이야기를 테드에서도 하셔가지고 정말 많은 화제가, 전 세계적으로 화제가 됐었는데, 결국은 창작 활동도 근육이랑 좀 비슷한 것 같아요. 약간 우리가 계속 매진하고 몰두하는 것도 중요하지만 잠시 내려놓고 우리 주변의 생각과 분위기와 환경을 좀 환기시키는 것도 지속 가능한 창작 활동에 큰 도움이 되지 않나라는 생각을 해보게 됩니다. 아마 시간상 마지막 질문이 될 가능성이 좀 높을 것 같은데 마지막 질문 한번 받아볼게요.
네, 저도 학생 때부터 너무 큰 팬이어서 이렇게 뵐 수 있어서 너무 영광스럽고 감사하고요. 궁금한 점은 이제 팀 구성원이랑 그리고 이 따르는 팀원들을 어떤 비전으로 끌고 가시는지를 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
So in the studio, I don't think I do a lot of teaching. So it's very different from, let's say, when I am at SVA. The students bring the stuff in and I very much critique and I very much say you should do this better and this doesn't work because of that and this and that. And I think in the studio we're really working, and I do think that there's a lot of people who become better in the studio, including Jessica. Including when Jessica came in, the reason that I hired her on the spot was her enthusiasm. The portfolio was good, but not fantastic. Jessica became great while she was working for us, but not because I taught her. I think, because she was good anyway, but also because I think it's more the environment, or maybe because they see how I work with clients, or what is important and what not. But I don't do any active teaching, or I don't have a particular written out system or goal for the company. Meaning now it's a little bit different, but now it's, basically in the last 5 years and all the work that you see in the exhibition. So the last 5 years, we did not do any commercial work, zero. That's not because I suddenly hate commercial work, I don't. I think it's super important that people who care do the big commercial jobs because they're ultimately much more visible than many of the artistic jobs that hang in museums. And at the same time, I feel I've done my share of branding projects in the same way that I felt 20 years ago, I've done my share of album covers. Where the 50th album cover wasn't as much fun as the first one. And it's the same was true for commercial or even cultural pieces. The 25th branding job wasn't quite as much fun as the first one. And so, also I think because I'm older now, and you mentioned I got much softer and calmer, very possible. I'm totally fine with that. I think that age appropriateness is something to embrace rather than run from. I would feel strange if I would have the same sort of desire to protest as I had when I was 20, now that I'm 61. So I embrace that. And I believe that the things that I'm doing now are also meaningful to me because if I'm not doing them, nobody else will do it. There will be plenty of other people who do good branding projects. There will be no shortage of it, also because that's where the money is. So it will always attract a good number of bad and also good designers. But I feel I should be doing things that if I'm not doing it, they just wouldn't exist. So this seems also because of my interest, because of my desire because of my love of figurative work and abstract work. It just seems to be the kind of stuff that I should be doing right now with that sort of experience at that stage of my life. And I'm extremely thankful that it still seems to resonate, meaning like, you know, that you guys are still coming on a afternoon to listen to it and to look at it. And from what I can tell from yesterday, the echo has been very good.
네, 이상으로 DDP 포럼 37회 마치도록 하겠습니다.